Hi guys, welcome back to Cloud Tech. In this video, I'm going to show you how to validate a request body before saving the information into a database. For example, if I try to save a student information into a database, and if the student email is not in the correct format, for example, abc@email.com is a correct format, and if the student email is not in this format, then I should not save that information into a database. Or if a mobile number is not a 10-digit number, then I should avoid saving that record into a database. So before wasting much time, let's get started. So here you can see I am on Spring Initializer where we can create this Spring Boot project. Now I will try to fill the project details and will generate a project. So here I'm going to use Java as a programming language. We'll use Maven as a builder tool. Then I'm going to select 3.5.4 as a Spring Boot version. Then I'll fill the project metadata. For example, I'll make the group as com.cloudtech. Then I'm going to make it as a validation demo. Then we'll give the package name as com.cloudtech. We'll choose jar as a packaging and we'll use JDK 17 as a Java version. Then I need to add the dependencies. So I'll use a web dependency to create the REST APIs. Then I will use Spring Data JPA to perform database related operations. I'm going to use MySQL as a database. I'll choose MySQL and then I'll use Lombok as a dependency for writing getter setters using annotations. Okay, so I'll just click on generate and I'll generate the project. And I'll open that project into IntelliJ. So let me do that. Okay, you can see I have opened the project into IntelliJ, which is validation demo. Now what I will do, I'll create a students related entity and we'll try to perform the student operations, like we'll create a student and we'll try to save that into database and we'll write one API which will give us the students which are there into database. So I'll just create the packages. I'll create the first package, which is controller, where we are going to write the endpoints. Then we'll create service layer. Well, we'll write the business logic. Then we'll create one repository layer where I'm going to write database related operations. Then I'll create a request DTO where I'm going to define the student body or student request. Then I'll create one entity which will be my database table, and then I think we are good with this. So let's create the first thing, which is entity, which we need to save into a database. For that, I'll create a class which is student, and inside the student I'll declare few fields. So first field will be student ID, so I'll make it as private. It should be integer, so I'll make it integer, and then I'll name it as student ID. Then I'll declare student name, so it should be string student name. Then I'll make a variable which is of type integer and I'll make it as marks. Then we'll have student email, so I'll make it as string of email and I'll declare a variable of type mobile. So I'll take mobile number 10 digits, I'll declare it as a string. Now we need to save this information into a database, and there should be a database table. So I'll map this table using entity. So it will basically map the student object into a database table with the name as student. Now this should have a primary key. So I'll use direct ID annotation on student ID because we are going to use student ID as a primary key. And I'm going to generate this value automatically. So I'll use generated value and I'm going to define a strategy to generate this value. So I'm going to use one of the strategy like generation type dot identity or sequence dot auto. You can use that based on your requirement. Now I need to have a getters and setters. So what I will do, I'll use add direct data annotation, which is there in Lombok. Then I'll use add direct all arguments constructor, generate a constructor with all arguments and a constructor without any argument using no arguments constructor. Now I'm done with the creation of entity. Next thing is I'll create a student request DTO object, which will basically give us the information from client side. So here Instead of new package, it should be new class. I'll create student request detail, and then I'll copy all the fields which are there except student ID because we are going to generate that student ID automatically. So here I'll just paste all these four fields, and then I'll use the annotations like add direct data annotation to have getters and setters. Then I'll use all argument constructor and then no argument constructor. Now I'm done with the creation of this student request detail. Next thing is we need to create a student for which we should have a repository which will help us to save student information into a database. So here I will do create a student repository. So it should be repository. And this is an interface. I'll use interface. And here I'm going to use JPA repository, which can help me or which provides me few methods which I can directly use to save the information into database. So here this JPA repository is generic. So I need to pass student as my entity and the primary key, which is going to be of type integer. Okay, I'm done with the creation of student repository. Now we need to save this information into database. So I'll write that logic into service layer. So here I'll create a new class saying student service, and I'll annotate this using a direct service. So whenever I need an instance of this service class, I'll be able to inject it using a direct auto-wired. Now I'll write a method which will help us to save a student information into a database. So I'll write the method public. So I'm going to return the student which we will save into a database. I'll use student here, and I'll a method name as create student. Okay. And here I need to pass the information which I'm going to get from the client. So here I'm going to use student request DTO, and I will make it as DTO. Now we need to save this information into database, and that expects an entity. So first thing is we need to get the information from student request DTO, convert it into an entity, and then save that entity. So I'll create an object of type entity, which will be student equal to new student. And then I'll put the information which is coming from DTO into this student. So student dot student name should be DTO dot get student name. Similarly, I'll fill other fields like student dot set email, and I'll take that email from the student dot get email DTO dot get email. Then student dot set marks, and I'll get those marks from DTO using DTO.getMarks, and again I'll use student dot set mobile, and I'll get that mobile from DTO. So it should be student dot get mobile. Now I need to save this information into database using student repositories. I'll create an instance of student repository. So it should be private student repository, and then I'll use student repository, and I can inject that instance using auto-wired annotation. So I'll use a direct auto-wired annotation. And then what I will do, I will simply save that student information into database using student repository dot save function. And here I'm going to pass the student entity. Okay, now I'm done with the saving of the student information, and I need to say send that information back when I save that student. So I can simply return the information which is saved into a database. Okay, now I'm done with the creation of this method. Next method is I need to see the students which are there into database. So I'll create another method which will give me all the students from the database. And this is going to be a list of students because I'm going to get all the students from the database. So it will be a list of students. So I'll make it as list of student, and I'll write method name as get all students. Okay, now I'm done with this. The next thing is we need to give a call to student repository and get all the records. So there is a method inside student repository which can give me all the records from the database. So this find all will give me all the students which are there into database. So basically it returns me a list of students. I can directly return this using return statement. Okay, now I'm done with this thing. So I'll remove the unused import. Okay, now this method needs to be called on some APIs. So I'll go to controller and I'll create a class with name as student controller. And here I'm going to write all the APIs. So I'll use a direct REST controller annotation. Okay, and I'll define a base URL saying like slash student. So all the requests will start with this endpoint or base URL. Next thing is I need to invoke the methods to create a student. So I'll use public, then I'm going to use student, and then I'll give a method name as. So I'll just import the student class, and then I'll create a student. So I'm going to write a method create student, and then this method expects student information. So I'm going to use student request DTO. So this DTO will have the student information which is coming from the client, and then I'll simply use service layer. So I need to call the service method for which I should have an instance of service layer. So I'll create an instance of service layer using private student service, and it should be student service. Now this needs to be injected. So I'm going to use a direct auto void annotation to inject this instance. Now I got the instance, I can call the method of service layer. So it should be student service dot create student, and I'm going to pass the student which I'm going to get from the client. Okay. Now this student request needs to be mapped with the JSON body. So I'm going to use a direct request body annotation. So this the request body which is going to be there in my API call will be mapped with the student request DTO, and then I'm going to save that information into a database using student service dot create student method, and I'll simply return the student which got created. Now this needs to be invoked on some endpoints. I'll write that endpoint here. Now it should be a post mapping because we are creating an object or creating a resource on the server, and I'll map the URL something like 7. Okay, now I'm done with the first API. Second API is I need to return a list of all the students. So I'm going to write a method which will be public. Then I'm going to get a list of students. So I'll use return type as list of student, and then get all students. Okay, and here again I'm going to call a method from service layer which will be student service dot get all students, and then I'll simply return this list as it is. Okay, so this is my second method which will give me all the students, and this needs to be invoked on some endpoints. So I'll write an endpoint using get mapping because we are going to get the data from the server. So here I'll write something like slash all. So when I invoke this endpoint, I'll get a list of all the students which are there into database. And when I invoke this API, I'll be able to create the student into a database. I think I'm done with the API creation. Now let's add the properties related to database. So I'll mention like server. So I'll just mention a port server dot port equal to let's say 8081, and then I'll add the database related properties which are like I need to provide the database URL, then I need to provide the username, password, and then I can provide the driver class name. Sometimes it is required, sometimes it's not required. So you can pass this according to your need. And then you can mention the DDL if you want to create a table or update the table. If it is not there, then use show SQL property to show the SQL queries and the console. So this is basic configuration which will be required to perform the operations on the database. Okay, so I think done with the creation of all these things. So I'll try to run this application. So I'll click here. So I'll enable the annotations process because it expects an IntelliJ to be enabled. Okay, so my application is getting started. So here you can see the application is started on port 8081. So what I'll do now, I'll go to Postman and I'll try to create a student. I'll use local host colon 808081, then slash student slash share, and this should be a post API. So I'll use this post and then I'll create a body which will give me the student information which needs to be saved into a database. Now this body expects student name. So I'll just copy the fields which are there in our request DTO and we'll use those. I'll use student name. So I'll paste that student name as it is here. And then I'll make student name as Sachin. Then I'll see marks. I'll make it as 90. Then I'll use email, something like Sachin. So I'll use double quote here. Sachin at direct email.com. And then I'll use mobile. And it will be something like 98676543120. Okay, and I'll again wrap this inside double quotes. So I think we are done with the mapping of all these fields. So I'll just try to save this information into a database and I'll hit the API. So you can see the Sachin has been created into a database. I'll just quickly show you this. So I had created a student table already while performing the operation. So you can see this is the record which got saved. I'll create another record just to show you. So I'll make it as Rahul. I'll make the marks as 92. Then I'll make it as Rahul at directemail.com and I'll keep the number as it is. I'll just change one digit and send the request. So you can see the another student got created and we can see it into a database. So I'll just run the query and you can see the record has been created into a database. Now what I will do, I'll try to create one more record and this time I'm going to mention the student name as empty. I'll make the marks as 0. I'll change the email format and I'll make the mobile number something like this and I'll try to save this information into a database. Now you can see this information has been saved into a database. And again, if I come here, you can see there is a record with the information which is not correct. Now this should not happen because the information which we are passing here is not in the correct format. Right? So student name should not be empty. So it should be there at least 2, 3, 4 characters. Your marks should be at least greater than 0. It can be 0, but you should have marks which is more than 1 and less than 100. Then you should have email which is in correct format like abc@email.com and you should have mobile number which is in 10 digits. So I should validate this information before saving into a database to avoid further issues or problems when you'll have the information. Okay, so what I will do now, I'll try to validate this information. So what we need to do, we need to add a dependency which is validation dependency. So I'll come here and I'll add validation dependencies. I'll just explore and I'll see the dependency. So this is the dependency which we should add in our project. So I'll open IntelliJ form.xml. So I'll stop the project now and I'll open the pom.xml. So here I came. I'll put this dependency here. Okay, now I'm done with the addition of this dependency. Next thing is what we need to do. We need to add validation related annotations on request DTO. So I'll come here and I'll open my student request DTO. Now that student name should not be blank, right? So what I will do, I'll use some annotations which will make sure that the student name will not be blank. So you can use that direct not blank annotation. So I'll just copy the annotations which I have and I'll try to explain. Okay. So this not blank annotation indicates that this student name should not be blank. Okay. Then I'm expecting the student name should have at least 2 characters and it cannot be having more than 20 characters. So I'm expecting name must be between 2 to 20 characters. Okay, similar to that, I'm expecting marks. Marks should be at least 1 or it can have maximum 100 marks. Okay, so I'll just use two annotations like the marks, minimum marks should be 0, maximum marks should be 100, right? So I can use a direct min annotation to indicate the minimum value and a direct max annotation which indicates the maximum value. And these are the messages which will be displayed on your console when something goes wrong. Okay, so I'm going to use these annotations on marks. Then I'm expecting the email should be in a correct format. So what I will do, I'll copy the at direct email annotation and I'll put it on this. So this at direct email annotation indicates that your email should be in a correct format and it should not be blank. So I'm going to say that email is required using at direct, not blank annotation. And then I'm going to make sure the mobile number is not going to be empty and it should have exactly 10 digits. So I can use the annotations like so here I'm going to use an out blank to indicate that mobile is required and I'm going to use a pattern using a regular expression. This regular expression indicates that my mobile number will be 10 digits. Okay, I'm done with the addition of these annotations, which will basically validate these fields. And now I'm going to make sure this will be validated while serving the information into a database. So I'll use a direct valid annotation on this request body. Okay, so I'm done with this. Now what I will do, I'll try to rerun the application and see how it goes. Okay, so application is getting started. So you can see it is started on 8081. Now I'll go back and see here. So I'll make one more field like Ashok. I'll make the mark size 90 and I'll make the mobile number as 543210. So it should be 10 digits. Let me check. So it is 10 digits. And I'm just missing the field, okay, which is email. So here my email is not correct. And I'm trying to save that information into a database. So you can see the I'm getting bad request, right? And if I go and see the logs, so here you can see I'm getting an exception, method argument not valid exception, and validation failed for argument 0 in student entity. You can see create student method, which expects student request DTO, and it says that field error in object student request DTO on field email. So my email field is having something which is not in the correct format and can see the rejected value. So this value has been rejected and you can see the error message here. So it says that you email must be a valid. Okay, but I'm getting this information when I see the logs, but that should not be the case. The client should understand here looking at the message that what is wrong with this request. Right, so what I will do, I'll try to display a message by handling these exceptions. For that I'll create a global exception handler. So I'll just stop this. So again, you can validate this information with all other fields like making student name as empty or putting a mobile number which is not 10 digit, or you can put the marks which is more than 100 or something like that. Okay, now what I will do, I will create a package which will be of type for exceptions. So I'll create package exception. Now here I'll declare a class which will be able to handle all the exceptions. So I'll declare it as global exception handler. Okay, and I'm going to use REST controller advice here. So it is basically going to give an advice to your REST controller. And now we need to handle the exception, which was method argument, not valid exception, right? So what I'll have some code which I can test here and then I'll try to explain it. Okay, so I'll copy the code here and paste it here. Okay, let me just import the things which are required and then we'll see the code. Okay, now I'm done with the importing all the required things. So here, what we said, we need to handle the exceptions, which is of type method argument, not valid exception. For that, I used a direct exception handler annotation to handle this exception. Okay, next thing is I declared an method which will give me a response in the format of map, which is basically a key and value pair. So here my key is going to be the field which is failing the criteria or which is not valid, having valid value. And this thing, which is basically a value, will be the message which we have declared inside student request UTO. And this is just a method name. Now I need to capture some information from the method argument, not valid exception. So I have passed that method as a parameter. Now I don't need this one, so I'll just remove this. Okay. Now what I'm doing here, so I have created a map which will be your errors map. And I'm just trying to iterate over the fields which are there inside that method argument, not valid exception. So here you can see I have declared a field of type field error, and then I'm simply getting all the errors or all the fields which are having errors from this exception, and I'm simply putting the field and error message inside this errors map, and I'm then returning that response entity as a response. Now that response is having, so we were getting bad request, right? So I just mentioned the bad request using HTTP status code. So this is sufficient to show the information on the console. Okay. Now what I will do, I'll simply rerun the application and see what happens. Okay. Now the application is getting restarted. Okay. Now the application is restarted on 8081. And now if I try to save the same information into a database, we'll get a message saying that email must be a valid email. So let us consider I make it as valid email, but I make the marks as 190. And now if I try to save, you can see marks must be between 0 and 100. And if I make the student name as empty, I'll get two messages. The student name must be between 2 and 20 characters, and marks must be between 0 and 100. And if I mention the mobile number, which is not 10 digit, and send the request, you can see it says that you should have mobile which is 10 digit. Okay, again, if I remove or provide invalid email and try to save, I'll get error message saying that email must be valid. So this is the way you can handle exceptions. You can validate the request body using Spring Boot. Okay, guys. So that's it from this video. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you. Bye bye.